Texas sky turned the color of old bone. Birds vanished. Chickens went silent in their coop. Wind struck like a fist. From the west, a black-green wall of cloud rose and began to turn, slow and vast, as a mill will driven by something that knew no mercy. At its base, a dark finger reached down, patient, deliberate, toward the flat earth. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a single breath. Roof boards began to scream. Nails tore free one by one. Dust boiled into a solid wall, turning afternoon into dusk. Two figures half fell into the root cellar as the first hail, ice the size of fists, hammered the shingles above. The lantern swung wild. Dirt sifted from the beams. Then the cellar door blew clean open, and the roar arrived. Not wind, something past wind, alive and starving. In the sudden black, the pressure crushed their ears. Arms locked tight. The world above came apart board by board. The lantern went out. Cedar Hollow, Texas. September 1889. The platform baked under a noon sun that seemed to hold a grudge. 10 women stood in a line like cattle at auction, which Delphine Hargrove thought was exactly what this was. Except nobody called it that. They called it opportunity. They called it a fresh start. She called it standing in the sun until her knees threatened to fold. The tin dipper came around. Twice. She refused it twice, because thirst was nothing. Thirst you could survive. Shame in front of a crowd was another animal entirely, and she'd learned that lesson already, learned it hard, learned it standing on her own father's porch, while he didn't even lift his eyes from his newspaper. So she stood, tongue pressed to the roof of her mouth. Spit gone dry as chalk dust. Fine women here. Mr. Whitfield's voice rolled out over the crowd like he was hawking tonic at a county fair. Trained in the domestic arts. Every one of them. He said it the way a man says something he said 100 times before. Practiced. Smooth. His eyes moved down the line of women, without ever quite landing on any one face too long. Except hers. His eyes skipped right past Delphine's, which told her everything she needed to know about how this morning was going to go. The first woman went to a rancher with silver in his temples. Miss Catherine, from Pennsylvania, could read, could write, could cipher, Whitfield announced, like arithmetic was some kind of miracle. The rancher helped her down off the platform, with a hand at her elbow, gentle as church. She smiled, relief plain on her face, as morning dew on grass. One down. Delphine kept her eyes on the horizon, on the place where the railroad tracks disappeared into heat shimmer, into nothing, into a kind of mercy that didn't include her. Beside her, a woman shifted her weight foot to foot. Mrs. Garrett, widow, 2 boys back in Missouri, waiting on a stepfather. Heard about you, Mrs. Garrett whispered, not unkind, just matter-of-fact the way you'd mention weather. The one that got sent back. Delphine didn't answer. Can't have children, Mrs. Garrett said, like she was reading it off a shipping label. The words hung there. Delphine let them hang. She'd heard worse. From her own kin, no less. Her mother pressing traveling money into her palm at the door, saying nothing, saying everything, closing that door soft. Final, like a coffin lid lowered polite. Another woman got claimed. Miss Dorothy, accomplished seamstress, could make a man's shirt, from pattern to final button, Whitfield crowed, and a farmer stepped up quick, like her value might spoil, if he waited. 8 women left. The spaces between the remaining women started to grow, started to feel like accusation, like the platform itself was widening the gaps on purpose, making sure everyone could see exactly who was left. Exactly who wasn't wanted. Delphine could smell the crowd now. Sweat and tobacco, and church perfume gone sour in the heat. Men spat into the dust. Women in calico dresses murmured behind gloved hands, and she didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying, because she'd heard it already. Twice, in fact, in the past 10 minutes, loud enough to carry. Something wrong with that one. A man's voice, unhurried. Got to be. Second time on the platform. Returned merchandise. Another voice agreed. almost cheerful about it. Her fingernails found her palms, bit crescents into the skin. She let them. Pain was a small thing. Pain she could hold quiet. What she couldn't hold quiet was her face. So she practiced the trick she'd learned in Mrs. Donnie's boarding house mirror. Look through people. Not at them. Stand like the shame wasn't eating a hole clean through your middle. Mrs. Garrett left next. Flew, skirts and all, into the arms of a German farmer built like good fence timber. 7 left. The younger girls went fast after that. 1 to a banker's son. 1 to a telegraph man. 1 to somebody's cousin visiting from Austin. 4, 3, 2, then, just her. The laughter started soft, like wind moving through corn before a storm. Then it built. Whitfield's face went the color of a ripe tomato, and he shuffled his papers like the answer to this disaster might be hiding somewhere in the pages. Now, Miss Hargrove here, he tried, experienced in household management. Somebody in the back hollered something about experience, about closing a deal, and the laughter swelled up around her like water rising past her knees, past her waist, threatening to close over her head entirely. Her legs wanted to buckle. They didn't. She stared at that horizon line, so hard she half expected it to crack open and swallow her whole. Better swallowed by the earth than standing here another minute, while the whole of Cedar Hollow decided, out loud, that she was something broken, something sent back, something nobody in 3 counties would risk his name on. She thought about the narrow room waiting for her back at the boarding house, the whispers that would trail her out of this town same as they trailed her out of the last one. That's when she heard it. Boots, on wood, slow, unhurried, like a man walking to his own execution, and not minding much either way. The laughter stuttered, then stopped, all at once, like somebody had turned a spigot. The crowd parted, actually parted the way water parts, the way the whole county seemed to know, without being told to get out of this particular man's way. And through that sudden corridor of silence came a rancher Delphine had never laid eyes on, but somehow already knew. Because everyone in 3 counties knew Caleb Thorne, the one who'd lost his wife, and the baby, 3 years back now, the one who never came to town socials, never tipped his hat to marriageable girls, never smiled at much of anything, if the stories were true. He stopped at the base of the platform. And here was the strange part. The part that would stay lodged behind her ribs for years afterward, small and sharp, as a splinter, that never quite worked its way out. He didn't look at her face. Not first. He looked at her hands. She realized, following his gaze down, that she'd unclenched her fists sometime in the last minute, without meaning to, and there were small drops of blood, where her nails had bitten through skin. Mr. Thorne. Whitfield mopped his face, with a yellowed handkerchief, voice climbing an octave. I wasn't aware you were looking to. Wasn't. Caleb's voice came out rough, like burlap dragged over stone. Changed my mind. He looked up, met her eyes. Not with pity. She'd braced herself for pity, had a whole wall built for pity, and it wasn't pity that came over that wall at all. It was something else. Something that looked like a man examining a piece of land he was about to put his whole life into. Careful. Serious. Like he was seeing something everybody else on this platform had somehow managed to miss entirely. This one, he said, loud enough for the whole crowd to catch. We're going. The silence that followed was complete. Church prayer complete. Delphine felt the platform sway beneath her, though she knew. It was solid pine. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Mr. Thorne. Whitfield again, papers rustling, voice pitched low now, urgent. I feel obligated to inform you of certain circumstances. Regarding Miss Hargrove's previous. Don't need to know. Caleb had already turned. Already started walking back through the parted crowd. She coming or not? Took her 3 tries to make her voice work. I'm coming. He nodded. Once. Kept walking. She grabbed her carpet bag. Light as hope, heavy as failure, both at the same time somehow, and followed him down off that platform and through a crowd that pulled back, from her like she might be catching. Their faces twisted up, with something between confusion and disappointment, like the show hadn't ended the way they'd paid to see it end. "That's Thorn," somebody whispered, "taking on another man's leavings. Fool's errand," another voice agreed. "She'll disappoint him too." Delphine kept walking, kept her eyes on those steady shoulders cutting through the crowd ahead of her. Her legs shook with every step. She did not stumble. She did not look back. The platform and every humiliation piled on top of it fell away behind her like a skin she was shedding, and ahead of her lay. She didn't know what, couldn't imagine what, but it had to be better than standing alone, while a whole town laughed at the shape of her. The wagon was waiting past the depot fence. Practical, unadorned, built for hauling, not showing off. He stopped beside it, didn't reach for her bag, didn't offer a hand up, just stood there, waiting, and she understood, standing in the dust, with her carpet bag cutting a groove into her palm, that this was a choice he was handing her. Even now, even after claiming her out loud in front of the whole gossiping length of Cedar Hollow, he was still letting her decide. She could walk away, back to the boarding house, back to the whispers, and the slow, grinding death of being unwanted in a new town every few months. Or she could climb up into that wagon. She threw her bag in the back, grabbed the sideboard, hauled herself up, boots catching in her skirts, nearly taking a tumble that would have put her flat in the dirt in front of God and everybody. She caught herself, made it up without his help. Something shifted in his face when she settled onto the hard bench beside him. Not quite approval. Something closer to respect, maybe, or the beginning of it. He climbed up, took the reins, clicked his tongue at the mule team. They rolled forward, left the depot behind. The silence between them now was a different animal than the silence on that platform had been. That silence had been the quiet before a hanging. This silence she didn't have a name for yet, but she could breathe in it. The wagon wheels found every rut in the road like they were being paid by the jolt. Delphine gripped the sideboard, knuckles gone white, working hard not to slide into the man beside her every time the wagon lurched. He sat like the bench was carved to fit him, moved with each jolt instead of fighting it. Behind them, the noise of the crowd faded to a murmur, then to nothing, just leather traces creaking, mule hooves on packed dirt, and underneath all of it, that low hum of her own heartbeat, still too fast, still trying to convince the rest of her body that the danger had passed. "Mr. Thorne." Her voice came out dusty. She swallowed, tried again. "There's things you should know about why I was still up there." "Don't need to know. But surely you'd want. You cook." The question caught her sideways. "Yes. Wash clothes." "Yes. Know which end of a chicken lays the eggs?" Despite everything. Despite the sun, the shame, the ache still sitting behind her ribs, her mouth twitched. "The back end, generally." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, might have just been dust in his throat. "Then we're good." They passed the last house on the edge of town, a place with a sagging fence and yellow roses gone wild and untended. She'd walked past it every day, from the boarding house, wondering, always wondering, if that was where she'd end up. Alone, forgotten, except for pity, and pity wasn't the same as being remembered. "Your bag's light," he said. "Don't own much." "Good," she said. "Don't have much to lose then." Something in that honesty settled a little of the noise in her chest. No pretense here. No promise dressed up as better than what it was. "The ranch," she started. Then stopped. What did she even want to ask? What kind of bed? How many cattle? Whether there'd be other people around or just her, and him and all that empty land stretching flat in every direction. 8 miles out, he said, like he'd read the question off her face. Maybe 960 acres. Most of it scrub. House has 4 rooms and a lean-to. He shifted the reins to one hand, pulled a kerchief from his pocket, wiped the dust from his face. "You'll want the lean-to." "The lean-to," Built it last month. A muscle jumped in his jaw, like he was grinding the words between his teeth before he'd let them out. Has its own door, lock on the inside. She studied his profile, weathered like old leather left out in weather, eyes fixed dead ahead on the road. You built me a room, she said slowly. Before you even knew I existed, built someone a room. His hands tightened just slightly on the reins. Figured whoever answered the advertisement would want space of her own. Advertisement. So he was one of those men, the kind who placed a notice in a paper and waited for a stranger to answer it. Except, you weren't even at the depot to meet us, she said. Wasn't planning on it. What changed? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer at all. A hawk circled overhead, riding some current she couldn't feel down on the ground. The mules plodded on, steady as a heartbeat, that refused to hurry no matter what was chasing it. Saw the crowd gathering, he said finally, like carrion birds. Went to see what the fuss was about. His hands tightened again. Found you. The last one. The rejected one. The one nobody wanted. I work hard, she said, needing suddenly to say something true out loud, something that was hers, and not a rumor somebody else had built for her. Don't complain. Don't expect much. Good. His jaw eased, just barely. Neither do I. They hit a deep rut, and the wagon bounced hard, and she caught herself against his shoulder before she could stop the motion. He was solid, warm through the cotton of his shirt. She pulled back quick, but not before she'd caught the smell of him. Lye soap, leather, something underneath both that reminded her, absurd as it seemed, of cedar. Stream up ahead, he said, like nothing had happened, like her shoulder hadn't just been pressed against his for one full second too long. Stop to water the mules. She saw it before he pointed. A green line cutting through all that brown, cottonwoods marking water the way water always marked itself out here. Like a promise, like the one thing this land wasn't willing to lie about. Then she saw the rider, waiting in the shade, hat pulled low. Caleb's shoulders went tight. His hand drifted toward the rifle propped against his knee. Didn't lift it, just rested there. That's Whitfield, he said, and the way he said it, the particular flatness of it, made something cold slide down the back of Delphine's neck. Whitfield sat his horse, with the patience of a man holding a winning hand of cards he hadn't decided yet whether to play. Rolled papers in one fist, tapping them against his thigh. Tap, 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 like a clock counting down to something. Caleb pulled the mules up 20 feet short of the water. Mr. Thorne. Whitfield touched his hat brim. Miss Hargrove. Harwick, Caleb started. Whitfield. The man corrected, mild as milk. Whitfield. Caleb's voice carried no more feeling than a man discussing fence posts. You got your fee. We got our business. Nothing left to say. That's where you're wrong. Whitfield's horse stamped, blew hard through its nose, eager for the water just past the man blocking its path. Whitfield held the animal firm. I've got obligations, he said. Legal ones. When a woman's been previously married and returned, there's documents need signing. Waivers. Protections. For you, Mr. Thorne. Delphine's stomach dropped straight through the wagon bench. Here it came. The details, laid out fresh for this man to chew over and decide whether he still wanted what he'd claimed back on that platform. Don't need protecting, Caleb said, clicked his tongue, started the mules walking. Whitfield nudged his horse sideways, blocked the path clean. You need to know what you're taking on. This woman, the words jumped out of Delphine before she could stop them, is sitting right here. Both men turned. She sat up straight, met Whitfield's eyes dead on. Whatever needs saying, Mr. Whitfield, say it plain, to my face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish pulled up onto a dock. Miss Hargrove, the divorce was final, documented. Your husband testified to normal. He glanced at Caleb, chose different words. There was a doctor's report. out of Fort Worth. Confirmed no obvious impediment. On his side. The word hung there in the heat between them. Makes a man wonder, Whitfield went on, warming to it now. What makes a woman? Makes a man wonder why you're still talking. Caleb's voice, soft, which somehow made it land harder than shouting ever could have. Move your horse. I'm trying to help you, Thorne. You're keeping my mules from water. You don't know what you're taking on. I know, Caleb said. You're speaking on things that aren't your business. And I know if you don't move that horse in the next 10 seconds. I'll move it for you. Whitfield's face went red, then white. His horse danced sideways, catching the tension the way animals always did. I'm only trying to do right by you. Whitfield tried again. 10 seconds, Caleb said. Was 9 of them. For one long breath, Delphine thought Whitfield might actually argue it out. Might actually stay put on principle alone. Instead he wheeled his horse hard, and spurred it harder than the animal deserved, and it leapt forward, kicking up a wall of dust that settled over everything like judgment come early. Caleb watched until horse and rider disappeared over the rise. Then he walked the mules down to the water himself on foot and let them drink their fill, while Delphine sat on the wagon bench, with her hands twisted together in her lap, and her heart still slamming against her ribs. She would think about that exchange again later, would turn it over and over trying to place exactly what had felt wrong about it, beyond the obvious wrongness of a man discussing her like livestock in front of her own face. It was this. Whitfield hadn't looked surprised that Caleb had claimed her. He'd looked calculating, like a man watching a plan tilt sideways and already working out how to right it again. Caleb led the mules back up from the water and climbed onto the wagon bench beside her, without a word. For a moment she thought he meant to say nothing at all about what had just happened. Then, sorry about that. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did. He clicked the mules forward. The wagon lurched into motion, and Delphine found herself watching his hands on the reins instead of the road ahead. Steady hands, big-knuckled, sun-browned, a thin white scar tracking across the back of the left one. You should know, she said finally, to his shoulder rather than his face. What he said was true, about there being no children. He didn't answer right away. You should know, he said, after a silence long enough to make her chest go tight, that my wife died trying to give me one. Baby died too. Took the better part of a day to die. While I sat there, useless as a man could be. The wagon jolted. Neither of them moved to steady it. So if you're worried I'm looking for a broodmare, he said, you can stop worrying. The words should have landed harsh. They didn't. They came out worn smooth instead, like facts handled so many times. Over 3 years they'd lost their sharp edges. Then why, she asked, take a wife at all? He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes were the color of winter grass, gray-green, and something in them that sat a long way off. Ranch don't run itself, he said. Need another pair of hands. Someone who can do what needs doing, without expecting much back. That's all. That's all. She nodded slowly. It was honest, at least. More honest than 3 years of Roland Dunn's promises had ever managed to be. Right up until the moment a doctor had said one word, and every one of those promises had turned to smoke in her hands. I can do that, she said. Work for my keep. That's all I'm asking too. Good. They reached the ranch as the sun tipped past its highest point. The house sat low against the land. Rough lumber, cedar posts, looking less like something built on the ground, and more like something that had grown up out of it, stubborn as everything else out here. A barn stood off to one side with a corral fixed to it. No garden, no flowers, no woman's touch anywhere, but solid. Everything about the place said solid, the way a fist says solid, before it's ever thrown a punch. Caleb showed her through fast. Stove works, but the damper sticks. Pump's good, comes off a spring. Cellar through that door. Smokehouse out back. Then the lean-to, narrow, private. Its own door to the outside, exactly like he'd promised. A simple iron bed with a cornshuck mattress. A washstand. Hooks on the wall. A small window dressed in flour sack curtains that somebody, she realized, with a small lurch in her chest, had hung, with more care than the rest of the house showed. Bolts there. He pointed to the latch on the inside of the door. Nobody bothers you here. He was already backing toward the kitchen. Chickens are in the coop by the barn. Probably need feed. Grains in the barn, marked bins. Preserves in the cellar. Salt pork in the smokehouse. Make yourself at home. You're leaving. He stopped at the kitchen door. Something had shifted in his face. Not toward her. Toward the window. Toward whatever he could see. Through it that she couldn't yet. Smoke. Thin and dark. Climbing off the horizon like a bruise spreading under skin. Fire, he said. Don't wait, supper. Might not be back till late. Maybe morning. But She swallowed the rest of it. What was she even going to say? That she didn't know where anything was in this house. That the thought of her first night alone in a stranger's home, with the stranger gone, sat like a stone in her throat. You'll be fine. He said it like fact, not like comfort. House is solid. You've got food, water, shelter. Lock the doors if it eases your mind. Then he was gone. She heard the wagon rattling away fast, and then she was standing in the middle of a stranger's kitchen, with the whole of an empty house settling in around her like water finding its level. She did not sit and wait for the fear to pass. She'd learned, somewhere in the wreckage of the last 3 years, that waiting for fear to pass only ever taught the fear how comfortable it could get, staying. So she moved instead. Took inventory. Cast iron stove needing blacking. A table with 2 chairs, one worn down more than the other. A shelf of dishes, none of them matching. A coffee pot on the stove still holding grounds from that morning. She ran a finger through the dust on the shelf. A clean line showed beneath it. Somebody had reached for something recently. Recently enough that the dust hadn't settled back in yet. She thought of Rosalind Thorne. The name she'd overheard once already, back at the boarding house, from a woman who liked to talk about everyone in the county whether she'd met them or not. The wife who'd died, 3 years gone now. She pushed the thought away. Not her business. Not yet, anyway. She scoured the coffee pot, wiped the table down to bare wood, good pine underneath all that grime that would gleam with enough care. In the root cellar she found treasures. Potatoes gone soft, but not spoiled, onions, a jar of preserved peaches that looked, when she held it up to the light coming through the cellar door, like sunset caught in glass. The chickens complained when she opened their coop. 5 hens and a rooster with opinions above his station. She found 4 eggs, still warm, nestled in the straw. Outside, the smoke had thickened. She could see it plain now from the yard, a black-green smear spreading across the sky, and every now and then, when the wind shifted, a flicker of orange underneath it that made her stomach clench tight. Miles away, she told herself that. Miles meant nothing to a fire with wind behind it, but she made herself believe it anyway, because there was cornbread to make, and beans to soak, and a man who might come home hungry and exhausted from fighting something that could just as easily have swallowed him whole. The sun went down, painting the sky the same ugly color as the smoke, and that's when she heard horses. More than one. She went to the window, shapes moving through the dusk. Men's voices she couldn't make out. Then boots on the porch. The door swinging open. Caleb stood there, covered head to boot in soot, and ash, a fresh cut on his cheek, where something had caught him. Behind him, 3 more men, equally black, equally weary, and every one of them looking at her with an expression that started at surprise and traveled somewhere less comfortable from there. Brought help, Caleb said. Fire jumped the break. The biggest of the 3, a red-bearded man, stepped past Caleb's shoulder into the kitchen. His boots left ash marks across the floor she'd only just finished scrubbing. Well now, Thorne. His smile showed too many teeth. You didn't say you had company. This is my wife. Flat. Final. The word wife hanging in the kitchen air like a fence line drawn between her and the 3 strangers filling up the doorway. Wife. The red-bearded man's smile faltered, reformed into something more careful. Since when do you have a wife, Thorn? Since today. Caleb crossed to the wash basin, started scrubbing black from his hands like the conversation was already finished. Fire's contained. For now. Wind dies down, should hold till morning. He dried his hands on the towel she'd hung by the basin. She noticed him notice it, noticed that it was clean, that it was hers now, hanging in a place it hadn't hung before. You boys best get back to your own places. Now hold on. A second man, thin, sun-baked, pushed forward. We've been fighting that fire all day. Least you could do is offer some grub. Delphine's hands found the edge of the table behind her. The cornbread sat cooling on the stove. Salt pork and potatoes staying warm in the skillet. Enough for one man, maybe two, not four. Wife's had a long day too, Caleb said. He positioned himself between the men and where she stood, casual about it but firm, the way a fence post looks casual until you try to move it. Just arrived from town. The bride sale. The red-bearded man's eyebrows climbed. You actually went through with that fool plan. Appreciate the help with the fire. Caleb opened the door wider. Not an invitation further in. An invitation out. Tell Reeves I'll come by tomorrow. Help him rebuild his break. The three men traded a look. The oldest of them, gray streaking his temples, cleared his throat. Come on, boys. Man wants his wedding night. Laughter followed them out the door and across the yard, and Delphine heard the red-bearded one. Silas Reeves, she'd learn his name properly later. Say something about mail-order goods, and another man laugh at it, and the sound of it followed her clean, through the closed door and settled somewhere under her ribs to stay. Caleb closed the door, set the bolt, stood there a moment, with his back to her, shoulders drawn tight, as fence wire strung too taut. I made supper, she said into the quiet. If you're hungry. He turned around slow, took in the cleaned kitchen, the food on the stove, the table scrubbed down to bare wood. You didn't have to. Had to eat myself. She filled a plate, set it in front of him. Sit, she said. You look ready to fall over. He sat. He ate steady, but not rushed, and when he'd cleaned the plate he sat back and looked at it like she'd served him Christmas dinner instead of cornbread and salt pork. Been 6 months, he said finally, since anyone cooked in this kitchen besides me. Shows in the grease stains that got almost a smile out of him, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But it changed his whole face for 1 second, made him look younger, less like something carved out of oak and rawhide and worry. Those men, she said, won't come back. They know you're here now. His jaw set. Word'll spread by morning. Nobody'll bother you. She wanted to ask what would have happened if he hadn't claimed her as wife right there in front of them. But she already knew the answer, more or less. It was the same thing that happened to any woman standing alone and unclaimed in this country. She let the question go unasked. That night, lying on the cornshuck mattress in her new room, with both doors bolted, and checked twice, Delphine stared up at the ceiling and counted knots in the wood like counting might slow her mind down enough to let her sleep. Through the thin wall she could hear him, the scrape of boots pulled off, the groan of bed ropes as he lay down. Then nothing, just his breathing turning steady, turning deep. This was her life now, this room, this house, this man who'd taken her on the way you'd hire on help. Practical, unsentimental, a bolt on the door, and nothing promised beyond a fair trade of work for shelter. No romance, no expectations. She told herself that was enough. She almost believed it. The rooster woke her, before dawn, crowing like it had something personal against the coming day. She dressed in the dark, muscles stiff from the thin mattress, and by the time she'd gotten the stove fired he was already in the kitchen, moving around her careful, the two of them working out an unspoken choreography of a kitchen too small for two strangers, and too big, somehow, for the silence between them. Working the home pasture today, he said. Fence needs checking. You need anything, from the barn, get it this morning. The chickens. Yours now. He pulled on his boots. Eggs too. Sell them if you want. Kitchen gardens out back if you've a mind to plant. Bit late in the season. Still time for greens. Turnips. He came in at noon, washed his hands without being asked, sat down to a meal she'd fixed, without knowing if he'd want it, and ate it like this was already routine instead of the second day of something neither of them had a name for yet. Fences sound, he said between bites. Lost some posts to rot on the north side. I can help set them. He looked up. You ever set a fence post? No, but I can learn. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to it. Maybe, he said, and went back to eating. Days fell into a pattern after that. Coffee before dawn. Him to his work, her to hers. Noon dinner if he was close enough to come in for it. Supper as the light went gold and then gray. Evenings on the porch, him whittling or mending harness. Her with the sewing basket she'd found forgotten in the parlor. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The work talked for them. Fixed fence. Mended shirts. Full bellies. Clean clothes hung snapping on the line. She learned his preferences without asking. Coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Beans heavy on the salt pork. Cornbread over biscuits every time. He learned hers too, somehow without either of them ever saying a word about it out loud. The water bucket always full on wash days, the squeaky board by her door fixed, before she'd even mentioned it bothered her. The burned prairie started showing green at its blackened base. Life pushing up stubborn through the ash. It was the third week hanging wash that she caught herself humming. Some tune from a childhood she barely remembered anymore. She stopped, looked around, guilty the way you look around after doing something you didn't know you still had in you to do. He was out in the far pasture. Nobody close enough to hear. Nobody to care. She went back to the wash. Let the humming start up again. Quiet. The clothes snapped in the wind. The sun sat warm on her shoulders instead of hammering down like judgment for once, and for one unguarded moment she forgot. Actually forgot to brace herself against the possibility of being content. That's when she saw the wagon. Not a rider this time. A wagon coming slow along the road, from town, and even at this distance, even before she could make out a face, something in the set of the driver's shoulders sent a cold thread winding down her spine. She set down the wet shirt still in her hands, watched it come, and felt, without knowing yet, who it carried or why, that whatever was riding toward her down, that road was not going to be simple. It was Whitfield. He pulled the wagon up at a careful distance from the house, careful in a way that told her he remembered exactly how that conversation at the stream had ended, and sat there a moment before climbing down, dusting off his coat like he was arriving somewhere respectable. Miss Hargrove. He tipped his hat. Mrs. Thorne, I should say now. Mr. Thorne's out in the pasture. It's you I've come to see, actually. He smiled, and there was something in the smile that didn't sit right on his face, like a coat cut for another man. Business matter. Regarding your previous arrangements. I have no arrangements left in this county, Mr. Whitfield. Ah! He reached into the wagon bed, pulled out a small case. That's where I'd have to correct you. He opened the case on the wagon's tailgate. Papers inside, official looking, a seal pressed into wax at the bottom of one page that caught the afternoon light. There's the matter of the homestead filing, he said. Mr. Thorne's claim, 160 acres, filed some years back under certain conditions regarding succession, regarding heirs. Something cold settled into Delphine's stomach. What does that have to do with me? Everything, my dear. He said my dear the way a man says it, when he doesn't mean anything gentle by it at all. A claim without an heir reverts, after a certain term, to territorial disposition, meaning it can be resold, meaning a great many things, actually, for a man in the right position to know when a claim's about to lapse. He closed the case. I only mention it, he said, because I'd hate for you to be caught unaware, should certain facts about your condition come to bear on Mr. Thorne's filing. She stood very still. Are you threatening him? I'm informing you. He climbed back up onto the wagon seat. A woman ought to know what kind of ground she's standing on, before she gets too comfortable standing on it. He tipped his hat again, and turned the wagon back toward the road, and Delphine stood there in the yard, with the wet shirt still clutched forgotten in one hand, watching the dust rise up behind his wheels, and thinking over and over, the same single thought circling back on itself. He'd known. He'd known about the land, about the filing, about whatever it was that made a woman like her unable to give a man an heir, into something more than just a personal disappointment, into a liability, written down, filed away, worth something to somebody apparently, though she couldn't yet see the shape of who or why. She didn't tell Caleb. Not that first evening. She told herself it was, because she wasn't certain what she'd even heard, wasn't certain the fear crawling under her skin was built on anything solid enough to hand to another person. She told herself several things that evening, standing at the stove with her back to him, while he ate his supper unaware. She was still telling herself those things 3 nights later, when the wind carried voices to her across the yard, from the direction of the barn, Caleb's voice, low, and another man's, and she went still at the well pump, with the bucket half raised, listening before she'd even decided to. Filing comes up for review in the spring, the second voice was saying. Whitfield's voice. He'd come back. Come at night this time when she wasn't meant to be listening. You understand the position you're in, Thorne. A wife with no children. No heir named. Territorial office isn't sentimental about these things. Get off my land. I'm trying to help you keep it. A pause. There's a way to secure the claim regardless. Certain arrangements. I could see the paperwork through quiet if the terms were agreeable. What terms? Delphine set the bucket down without a sound. Moved closer to the barn's shadow, close enough now to hear the low murmur beneath Whitfield's next words, close enough to catch only fragments. The north section, worth considerably more. Nobody need know how the filing reads. Before Caleb's voice cut through, hard as a slammed door. Get off my land, Whitfield. Last time I'll say it. Boots. A horse startled into motion. The sound of it fading off down the dark road. Delphine stood in the shadow of the barn, with her heart going hard against her ribs, and understood, all at once, that whatever Elias Whitfield wanted, from Caleb Thorne's 160 acres, it had started long before she'd ever stepped off that platform. And that somehow, without ever meaning to be, she'd been made a piece of it. The days after Whitfield's visit moved different. Delphine noticed it in herself first. The way she started listening to hoofbeats on the road, before she'd even consciously decided to listen. The way her hands went still, over the washboard whenever a shadow crossed the yard too quick, too purposeful, and then relaxed again, when it was only a hawk, only wind, only nothing at all. She hadn't told Caleb what she'd heard by the barn, which was strange, because she told herself morning after morning, stirring the coffee, that today would be the day. Today she'd set his plate down and say it plain. I heard you and Whitfield talking. I heard the word claim. I heard the word heir. Except the morning would come, and go and the words would stay lodged somewhere behind her teeth, and she couldn't have said, not honestly, whether it was fear keeping them there, or something closer to shame. Because if she told him what she'd heard, she'd have to admit she understood exactly what it meant. A wife with no children was a filing risk. She was the risk. The knock came on a Tuesday. Sharp. 3 raps, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that already had an opinion about what it would find on the other side of the door. Delphine wiped her hands on her apron, and opened it to find a woman sitting rigid on a side-saddle horse in the yard, black riding habit buttoned to the throat despite heat, that had the animal's neck dark with sweat. Behind her, a second horse, a girl of perhaps 16 holding both sets of reins, with the patient boredom of someone who'd been dragged along against her wishes. Mrs. Thorne, the woman dismounted without waiting for help, handed her reins off without looking. Constance Doyle, I do hope we're not interrupting. She was already looking past Delphine's shoulder, into the kitchen, before the sentence finished. Mrs. Doyle. Delphine kept her voice even, kept the door open the width she chose to open it, no wider. Please, come in. Constance came in like she was inspecting a property she meant to purchase, and hadn't yet decided against. Her eyes moved, over the swept floor, the mended curtains, the shelf Delphine had scrubbed down to bare with 3 weeks running now. Something in her face tightened, like she'd been hoping for less. "How charming," she said, in a tone that meant the opposite entirely. "You've done wonders with so little to work with." "Coffee?" Delphine asked because it was easier than answering that. "If you have it." One never knows what provisions a bachelor establishment might lack. Delphine set the pot to heat, pulled down 2 cups, the good ones, china painted with tiny roses, found wrapped in newspaper at the back of a shelf her first week here. Constance's eyes caught on them immediately. "Those were Sarah's," she said. Delphine's hand went still around the cup. "I'm sorry, Rosalind's," Constance corrected herself, waving a gloved hand like the slip meant nothing. "Forgive me, I misspoke." But Delphine had heard it. Heard the way the wrong name had come out first, natural, unthinking, the way a name comes out when it's been said 1,000 times before the right one ever needed saying at all. "Sarah." She filed it away. "Didn't ask." "Not yet. I remember when she ordered those." Constance went on, settling into a chair like she owned the right to it. "From the Sears catalog. Such refined taste. Could play piano. Speak French. Her needlework won ribbons at the county fair." "They're pretty," Delphine said, because there wasn't much else to say to that, and she wasn't going to give Constance Doyle the satisfaction of watching her flinch. "Tell me," Constance said, sugar cube balanced between 2 fingers, "where exactly are you from?" "Back east." "How wonderfully vague." "Your people." "Some of them," Delphine said. "Not all." Constance's mouth pressed thin. "And how did you and Mr. Thorne meet?" "It must have been quite the whirlwind courtship. No one in the county knew he was even corresponding with anyone." Delphine sipped her coffee. Let a silence stretch just long enough to make Constance's fingers tighten on her cup. "We met when we needed to," she said finally. "How romantic." Constance set her cup down with a click of china on wood. "Though I suppose romance isn't strictly necessary. Practical considerations do suffice for some. I imagine Mr. Thorne's grateful for the cooking," Delphine said. The girl in the corner, Constance's daughter, quiet until now, made a sound that was almost a laugh before she smothered it fast behind her hand. Constance's nostrils flared. She stood. "We really must be going." Then at the door, glancing back, "I'd love to see the rest of the house before we leave." Rosalind had such plans for it. I'm sure she'd want to know it's being kept. There it was again. That name, offered up like a stone dropped in still water, meant to see how far the ripples traveled. "The house is as it needs to be," Delphine said. Constance's eyes lingered a moment too long on the doorway to the lean-to before she finally turned for her horse. It was after they'd ridden off, Constance rigid-backed with disapproval, the daughter turning once to lift a small, apologetic wave, that Delphine found it. A small leather book, worn soft at the corners, tied with a ribbon gone the color of weak tea. Sitting on the table exactly where Constance Doyle had been sitting, exactly where a woman does not simply forget something so plainly precious. Left, on purpose, like a slap dressed up as an accident. Delphine picked it up, turned it over once in her hands. Rosalind Elizabeth Thorne, her book of days. The smart thing was to set it aside. Hand it to Caleb when he came in from the fields, let him decide unread what to do with the private thoughts of a dead woman. She told herself that, told herself firmly, the way you tell yourself something you already know you're not going to do. Her fingers were already working the ribbon loose. The first page fell open, before she'd finished deciding whether she meant to let it. January 3rd, 1884. Married 4 days now, and already I understand less of this country than I did the day I arrived. The wind here does not stop. It simply changes what it's carrying. Delphine sat down slow at the table she'd only just cleared of coffee cups. Read on, though every instinct told her to close the cover and walk away from it. January 20th, 1884. Caleb brought me a length of blue ribbon from town today. Said it matched something. Didn't finish the sentence. I've decided it matched my eyes, and I've decided I don't need him to say it for it to be true. The handwriting was careful. Schoolroom perfect. Each letter formed like it had been taught, practiced, prized. Delphine turned pages faster now. Months compressing under her thumb. Spring turning to summer, turning to a second winter. The entries thinning, as the work of the ranch pressed in around them, until March 1885. Whitfield came by again today. Third time this month. Caleb doesn't know I speak with him. Whitfield says there are men in the territory office willing to make my father's old debts disappear entirely. If only Caleb would consider selling off the north section. Says it would be no trouble at all to arrange. Says he only wants to help. Delphine's breath caught. I told him no. I don't like the way he looks at the land like it's already halfway to belonging to somebody else. She flipped forward, hands not quite steady now. June 1885. Whitfield again. Different offer this time. Says if I were to speak to Caleb about naming an heir sooner rather than later, a nephew, a cousin, anyone with thorn blood in the filing, it would secure the claim regardless of whether we're ever blessed with children of our own. Says it's only practical. I told him that's not his business to be practical about. The entries after that grew sparser. Shorter. A woman running out of time, or running out of words for what was closing in around her. September 1885. I am with child. Have not told Whitfield. Have not told anyone but Caleb, and even then I made him promise on his mother's Bible that he'd say nothing to a soul in town until I was further along. I don't trust the way news travels here. I don't trust who's listening for it. Delphine's hands had gone cold around the book's spine. The last entry, dated barely 2 weeks before. She did the arithmetic without meaning to, felt it land in her stomach like a dropped stone. Before Rosalind Thorne had died, read only this: if anything should happen to me, find someone who isn't trying to become anyone but herself. Someone who won't let a man like Whitfield decide what she's worth by what she can or can't give away. The kitchen door opened. Delphine slammed the diary shut, shoved it under a dish towel too fast, too clumsy, and turned to find Caleb standing in the doorway, sweat cutting tracks, through the dust on his face, sawdust caught in his hair, from a day spent shoring up the barn's north wall. We had a visitor, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Heard the horses. He crossed to the wash basin. Water splashed. Constance Doyle. And her daughter. What did she want? To inspect. Delphine busied herself at the stove, so she wouldn't have to watch his face for what came next. To judge. Make sure I understood about. She stopped herself. About Rosalind, she finished. He went very still at the basin. She leave satisfied? She left something behind. Delphine pulled the diary out from under the towel. Set it on the table between them like it might go off. Caleb stared at it the way a man stares at a rattlesnake he's not certain is dead yet. Sarah's book, he said, quiet. There it was again. Delphine's mind snagged on it before she could stop it snagging. Sarah, not Rosalind. Sarah. And she opened her mouth to ask, and then didn't, because his hand was already reaching for the diary. Pulling back, reaching again, and finally closing around it like something he'd thought burned to ash years ago. Thought I'd gotten rid of everything, he said. Constance left it on purpose. Sounds like her. He opened the cover. Read the first line. His jaw worked once hard. You read it. Some of it, Delphine admitted. Before you came in. He nodded. Kept turning pages. Stopped at one. Read it in silence long enough that Delphine had to fight the urge to fill the quiet with something, anything, just to keep from watching his face change the way it was changing. You called her Sarah, Delphine said finally. Just now. And Constance did too. Caleb's hand went still on the page. Rosalind was her middle name, he said. Went by Sarah growing up. Started signing things Rosalind after we married. Said it sounded more like a rancher's wife. A pause. I never got used to it. Old habits. It was such a small thing. Such an ordinary, forgivable thing. And still something in Delphine's chest loosened at the explanation. Some tension she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying since the wrong name first slipped out of Constance Doyle's mouth. "There's things in there," Delphine said carefully, "about Whitfield." Caleb's eyes came up sharp. "What things?" She wrote that he came around more than once, talking about debts, about the north section, about naming an heir early to protect the filing regardless of. She made herself say it. Regardless of children. The silence that followed had a different weight to it than any silence that had passed between them yet. "Same as he told me," Caleb said finally. "Lo, word for word. Near enough. He's done this before. Looks that way. So it wasn't only her." The thought landed in Delphine's chest, with a strange mixture of relief and horror both at once, tangled up so tight she couldn't separate one from the other. Rosalind too. He'd circled her too, the way a buzzard circles something not dead, yet but getting there. And Delphine's mind kept snagging on the arithmetic of it, kept turning it over. How long had this man been doing this? How many women? How many claims? How many? "I need to tell you something," Caleb said. "About her. About what happened. You don't owe me that." "Maybe not." He sat down heavy in the chair across from her. "But you should hear it anyway." He told it slow, told it like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying. So long his arms had forgotten how to do anything else. "She was fragile," he said. "Not just her body. Something in her spirit too. Beautiful and fragile. Like those teacups she ordered clear from St. Louis. She tried, though. Lord knows she tried to make this place feel like something more than boards and nails." His fingers found a rhythm against the table. Stopped. "When she found out she was carrying, she was happier than I'd ever seen her. Started sewing little things, picking names. Caleb. Labor started early, 2 months early." His voice had gone flat, the way voices go flat when the alternative is breaking. "I wanted to fetch the doctor straight off. She said no. Said it was false pains. By the time I knew different, the roads were mud from spring rain. Took me 5 hours to get to Fort Worth and back." Delphine's stomach turned over slow. 5 hours, he said again, like the number itself was the wound. Baby was stuck by then. Had been for hours already. Doctor got him out. He never breathed. He stopped there. Delphine didn't push him further, and after a moment, he found the rest of it on his own. Sarah held on another day, long enough to understand what happened, long enough to blame herself for it over and over like it was something she'd done wrong instead of something that had simply happened to her. His eyes came up. Know what her last words were? Delphine shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Find someone stronger." His jaw tightened. Not "I love you," not "remember me," just "find someone stronger." The words matched, near enough, what Delphine had read in the diary not an hour before. Find someone who isn't trying to become anyone but herself. 2 different phrasings of the same dying wish, and somewhere in the gap between them sat a whole marriage's worth of grief Delphine had no right to touch, and couldn't, somehow, stop herself from feeling anyway. "I built the Linto for a nursery," Caleb said. "Spent 2 months carving flowers into a cradle headboard before I ever knew it'd never be used for what I built it for." Which explained the room. Delphine's mind reeled backward, fast, to that first day. The careful bolt, the flour sack curtains hung, with more care than the rest of the house showed, the fresh lumber smell that hadn't fully faded, yet even now, he hadn't built her a room out of thoughtfulness. He'd built it out of grief he didn't know what else to do with. And she didn't know, sitting there, whether that made the gift smaller or larger than she'd first understood it to be. "I didn't want stronger," he said, quieter now. "I wanted nothing. Work. Silence. No more dying on my watch." "Then why answer the advertisement at all? Ranch can't run itself." A long breath. "And the men in this county talk. A bachelor with land becomes a target one way or another. Widows with casseroles. Fathers pushing daughters. Whitfield with his arrangements. His mouth twisted on the word. Easier to have a wife. Safer. Safer. There it was again. The word doing all the work 100 softer words couldn't manage. So you picked the one nobody else wanted, Delphine said. I picked the one who stood straight, while the whole town laughed at her. His eyes held steady on hers. That's different. She didn't have an answer for that. Not one she trusted herself to say out loud. That night, after the dishes were done, and the lamp turned low, Delphine sat at the kitchen table long, after Caleb had gone to bed, the diary still sitting where he'd left it, closed now, ribbon retied with more care than the first time. She thought about Whitfield's visits to Rosalind, about debts, about the North section, about an offer to secure the claim through a nephew, a cousin, any Thorn blood at all, so long as it wasn't tangled up in whether a wife could bear children or not. Which meant this was never really about her at all. The thought settled cold and clear, like water finding the bottom of a well. It was about the land. It had always been about the land. She was only ever the excuse he needed this time around. She should have felt relief at that. Should have felt the weight of shame lift some, knowing the rumor that had chased her out of one town and humiliated her clean off a train platform in another had never truly been about her body at all. Instead, she felt something colder settle in behind her ribs, because if it wasn't about her, then it could happen to anyone. Roland Dunn arrived on a Thursday riding a horse that had clearly come a long way and didn't much care for the last stretch of it. Delphine was hanging wash when she heard the hoofbeats and something in the rhythm of them, off, uneven, a rider more anxious than his horse, made her set the wet shirt down before she'd even turned to look. He looked older than she remembered, which was strange considering it had only been a year and some months since she'd last stood across from him in a courtroom in front of a judge who hadn't much cared to look at either of them, while he signed the papers dissolving what God, apparently, hadn't seen fit to bless in the first place. Delphine. Her name in his mouth still had the same shape it always had. Familiar in a way that made her skin crawl a little, the way a house you used to live in still smells like your own cooking years after you've moved out. Mr. Dunn. She kept the clothesline between them, kept a fence post's width of distance she wasn't about to give up for politeness. You're a long way from home. I heard you'd married. Word travels. Whitfield mentioned it. Something flickered across his face at the name. Something that looked, to Delphine's practiced eye, uncomfortably close to fear. In a letter. You're corresponding with Elias Whitfield. Wasn't my choice exactly. He dismounted, stood there working his hat between his hands like it needed wringing out. I need to talk to you, alone, if your husband's not close by. He's in the east pasture. Good. Roland's throat worked. That's good. They sat on the porch steps, because Delphine wasn't about to invite him, into a kitchen she'd worked too hard to make hers, and because some part of her, some part still raw, from a courtroom and a doorstep, and a mother's silent hands pressing traveling money into her palm, needed the fresh air between them more than she needed comfort. I remarried, Roland said, back in the spring. Congratulations. She's not with child. The words dropped between them flat, and Delphine felt something in her chest go very still, waiting to see where he meant to take this. We've been trying near on a year now, he said. Nothing. So I took her to a doctor. New one. Not the same man from Fort Worth. Roland. He says it's me. His voice cracked just slightly on the word. Says whatever the trouble is, it was never you at all. There it was. The floor tilted just slightly under Delphine's feet, though she was sitting perfectly still on solid wood steps. There it was, the sentence she'd waited a year and a half to hear, and now that it had finally come, it landed nothing like she'd imagined it would. She'd pictured relief, vindication, some hot, clean rush of I told you, I told everyone. Instead it just sat there, heavy and strange. A truth arrived too late to undo any of the damage it might have prevented. You knew, she said slowly. Didn't you? Even then. Roland's eyes dropped to his hat. The doctor in Fort Worth, he said. The report he gave the court. Whitfield paid him. The world went very quiet. Paid him for what? Delphine said. Her voice had gone somewhere flat and dangerous, somewhere she didn't fully recognize as her own. To write it the way it was written. Roland's hands twisted the hat brim near to ruin. Whitfield came to me before the hearing. Said if the report favored me. Said I was sound, said the trouble sat with you. The divorce would go through clean and quick, no messy contest, and he'd see you placed somewhere useful after. Said it was a kindness, even. Said you'd be better off starting fresh someplace new. Kindness. The word sat so obscene in the afternoon air that Delphine had to look away from him, out toward the fields, just to keep her hands from shaking where he could see them. Why would he care, she said. One way or another. What did it matter to him whose fault it was? I didn't ask. Roland's voice had gone small. I was scared, Delphine. Scared of what people would say about me if the fault sat on my side instead of yours. I let him write it however he wanted written, and I signed where he told me to sign, and I told myself it didn't matter because we were finished anyway, no matter whose fault it turned out to be. It mattered, Delphine said. Quiet. Final. It mattered to every person who spat at me on that platform because they thought they knew something true about me that wasn't true at all. Roland flinched like she'd struck him. I know, he said. I know that now. Why come here? Why now? Because I'm scared. He looked up at her, and for one unguarded moment she saw the boy she'd married a lifetime ago instead of the man who'd let her be humiliated to save his own pride. If word gets out the doctor's report was false, if Whitfield's dealings come to light, I could lose everything. My new marriage, my standing. I came to ask. He stopped. To ask what? Delphine said, though some cold, clear part of her already knew. To ask you not to say anything. If it ever came up, I'd make it worth your while. There's money I could get off this land. Her voice came out low, steady, steadier than she felt. Delphine, you let a whole town believe I was broken, she said, standing now. Because it was easier than telling the truth, and now you're asking me to protect that lie a second time, so you can keep yours. I'm not asking you to lie. Just to say nothing. Silence is a kind of lie, Mr. Dunn. I learned that lesson standing on a train platform while you weren't there to stop it. He stood too, hat crushed now near past saving. You could ruin me, he said. Quiet. I could, she agreed. But that's not why I'm not going to make you any promises today. He rode off before Caleb came in from the pasture, and Delphine stood in the yard along, while after the dust of him had settled, turning over everything he'd said, everything it meant, everything it confirmed about a man she'd never once laid eyes on, but who had somehow reached into her life twice now and rearranged it to suit his own purposes. Whitfield had paid a doctor to lie. The thought kept circling back on itself, wouldn't settle, wouldn't let her rest, which meant the rumor that chased her out of one town wasn't a rumor at all. It was a manufactured thing. Built on purpose, aimed at her on purpose, and she still didn't understand the why of it. Not fully, not yet, except that it kept circling back every time to land square on that same word. Land. She found Caleb in the barn, that evening, running his hand along a support beam he'd shored up, that afternoon, testing its give. Roland Dunn came by, she said. His hand went still on the wood. Your husband. My former husband. She let that sit a moment. He told me something about the doctor's report, the one used in the divorce. Caleb turned to face her fully now, something sharp coming awake behind his eyes. Whitfield paid the doctor, she said, to write it the way he wanted it written, to put the fault on me instead of Roland. And now Roland's new wife isn't with child either, and a different doctor's told him plain the trouble was never mine to carry. The barn went very quiet. Somewhere overhead a swallow shifted in its nest, wings rustling once against the rafters. Why, Caleb said finally, why would Whitfield care one way or the other about your marriage? Your divorce. None of that touches him. I don't know yet. Delphine's hands twisted in her apron. But I think it's the same reason he came to Rosalind. The same reason he came here, talking about your filing, your heir. I think there's a pattern to it, and I think we're only seeing the edges of it. Caleb was quiet a long moment, turning something over behind his eyes. There's a strongbox, he said finally. In Whitfield's office in town. Obadiah Sloan mentioned once he'd seen Whitfield locking papers into it late at night, more of them than one land office ought to need. You think there's proof in it? I think, Caleb said slowly. We've been so busy defending against what he's already done that we haven't asked what he's planning next. They didn't get the chance to ask it properly, because 2 days later, the sky over Cedar Hollow turned a color neither of them had a name for. It started with the birds. Delphine noticed it first, while she was pulling the last of the turnips, some prickling wrongness crawling up the back of her neck, before her mind had caught up to naming the cause. The birds had gone quiet. Not just quiet, absent. Not a single wing beat overhead, not a single call from the cottonwoods along the creek, and the hush of it sat, so wrong against the ordinary afternoon, that she straightened up from the garden, with dirt still caught under her nails, and turned a slow circle, scanning the horizon for whatever the birds already knew, and she didn't. The chickens had gone still in their coop too, huddled together without being driven, without so much as a squawk between them, and that wrongness alone was enough to send Delphine's pulse climbing, before she'd even seen the sky. Then she saw the sky, yellow, the color of old bone, of something gone sick, stretching low across the whole western edge of the world, and underneath it air so thick and pressed down it felt like trying to breathe through a wet cloth. Storm's coming, Caleb's voice, carrying from the direction of the barn, already moving fast, already driving the cattle in toward the near pasture, with an urgency that told her this wasn't ordinary weather they were dealing with. How bad? She called, dropping the turnips, running toward him. Big one. He didn't slow down to say it. Get inside. I need to board the windows. I can help. Fill everything that holds water. He was already moving past her toward the tool shed. Tub, buckets, pots. This could last days. Delphine ran for the house as the first gust hit. Not gradual, not building, just an immediate slam of wind that staggered her sideways, that filled her mouth and eyes with grit before she'd gone 3 steps. Dust rose in a solid wall, turning the middle of the afternoon into something closer to dusk. Inside, she moved fast, pumped water until her arms burned, filled the wash tub, the cooking pots, even, absurdly, some part of her registering the absurdity even as she did it, the good china cups Rosalind had ordered clear from St. Louis, because every vessel that could hold water was a vessel that needed holding water now. Through the window she saw Caleb wrestling boards up over the glass, his shirt whipping flat against his body, hair plastered sideways by wind that hadn't existed 20 minutes before. Thunder rolled across the flat land, so deep and so close she felt it land in her chest, before her ears had finished registering the sound of it. Then lightning. Not a single strike, but sheets of it, whole seconds of white, that lit the yard stark as bone, and in that light she saw the shape of what was coming. The temperature dropped 20 degrees between one breath and the next. Caleb burst through the door, hair wild, eyes bright with something Delphine had never seen on his face before. Not fear exactly, something faster and colder than fear, something that moved a man's hands before his mind had finished catching up. Cellar, he said. Now. The house. This ain't a regular storm. He pointed, through the last unboarded window, and Delphine followed his hand to the horizon, and understood, all at once, exactly what she was looking at. The whole western sky had vanished behind a wall of black-green cloud, rotating slow and enormous, as a mill wheel turned by something, with no interest in mercy. And at its base, reaching down, patient, deliberate, like the finger of something passing judgment on the whole flat world beneath it, a funnel. 10 minutes, Caleb said. Maybe less. They grabbed what they could in the time they had. The water bucket, a lantern, the egg basket Delphine had only just filled that morning. The cellar door fought them, wind trying to tear it clean out of Caleb's grip, and they half fell down the steps together, as the first hail hit the roof above. Not rain, not even close to rain, but chunks of ice the size of a fist, hammering the shingles like grapeshot. The cellar was small, dark, smelled of packed earth and last year's potatoes. Caleb lit the lantern, with hands that weren't quite steady, hung it from a beam overhead. In the yellow light, Delphine saw a thin line of blood tracking down his cheek, where something, a board, a stone, the storm itself, had caught him on the way down. "Let me—" She reached for his face. The house above them screamed. Not a metaphor, not exaggeration. An actual scream, wood straining past what wood should bear. Nails pulling free of their joists one by one in a sound like something alive being taken apart. "Get down." Caleb pulled her against the back wall, folded himself over her, as dirt began sifting down between the boards overhead. The lantern swung wild on its hook, throwing shadows that lurched and twisted across the earthen walls like something trying to claw its way in. The roar came then. Not wind, something past wind, something alive and starving, and the cellar door above them rattled once, twice, and then blew clean open, with a force that sucked the breath straight out of Delphine's chest. This is it. The thought arrived flat and strange, almost calm, the way thoughts arrive sometimes in the very center of a thing too large to properly fear. This is how it ends. Not the sun on the platform, not Whitfield and his papers. Just this. Just wind and dark, and a stranger's arms around me. Except he wasn't a stranger anymore. She understood that too, in the same flat, strange moment, pressed against him in the dark, while the world came apart, over their heads. Caleb's grip tightened. His lips moved against her hair, words she couldn't hear, over the roar, but felt anyway. Felt the shape of them against her scalp, and some part of her mind, that refused to stop working even now decided they were her name. Repeated, over and over, like an anchor thrown down, into water too deep to find bottom. Delphine wrapped her arms around his waist, held on with everything left in her. If this was the end of it, at least it wasn't the end of it alone. The lantern went out, perfect black, just the roar, and the pressure building in her ears like diving too deep too fast, and two bodies pressed together against packed earth, while somewhere above them 160 acres of a dead woman's garden, and a living woman's carefully scrubbed kitchen were being scattered across the width of the county. Then, sudden as it had come, the roar began to move on, still there, still enormous, but traveling now, chewing its way towards someone else's life instead of theirs, and the pressure in Delphine's ears released all at once, with a pop that left the whole world ringing. She could hear again, Caleb's ragged breath against her hair. Her own breath, come apart into something closer to a sob than she'd meant to let it become. "Stay here," he said, pulling back just enough to see her face in the thin gray light now filtering down, through where the cellar door used to be. No. Her hands found his shirt again, held on. Together, or not at all. He looked at her a long moment. His hand came up, touched her cheek, checking for injury or something else entirely. She couldn't have said which and didn't much care to guess. Together, then, they climbed out slow, Caleb first, reaching back to pull her up, after him, and Delphine stepped up, into a world that had rearranged itself entirely in the space of 10 minutes. Where the kitchen should have stood, sky showed through instead. The roof was gone, half the walls with it. The stove sat untouched in the wreckage, absurd in its stubbornness, but the table she'd scrubbed to bare pine her very first week here, had vanished entirely, taken clean off wherever the storm had decided to carry it. "The barn," Delphine breathed. They turned together. The barn was gone. Not damaged, gone the way a word is gone once you've said it, leaving nothing behind but the shape of where it used to sit. In its place, scattered lumber, and one bewildered cow standing amid the wreckage, lowing pitiful and confused at a world it no longer recognized either. The chicken coop had been lifted whole and set back down 20 feet away, upside down, and from underneath it came a furious, indignant squawking that struck Delphine in that moment as the single most absurd sound she had ever heard in her life. Caleb laughed. Not happy laughter. The kind that comes when the only alternative left is crying, and crying is a door a man's not ready yet to open. Chickens survived, he said. Barn didn't. Then his laughter died all at once, and Delphine followed his gaze and understood why. The lean-to, her room, the corner of the house where she'd slept every night for weeks now. Bolt checked twice, before sleep, flour sack curtains hung, with more care than the rest of the house had ever shown. Gone. Everything except the bare floor and part of one wall. Her carpet bag vanished. Every stitch of clothing she owned, scattered to wherever the storm had decided to carry it. But Caleb's room, the main bedroom, stood nearly untouched. Windows blown out, but four walls still standing, roof still holding. Storm's got its own mind about things, Caleb said quietly, following her stare. Took your room, left mine. They stood there in the wreckage a moment, neither of them speaking, and Delphine became aware, slowly, of exactly how they were standing. Arms still wound around each other from the cellar, hearts still hammering in something close to unison, the distance between a business arrangement and whatever this had become having narrowed, sometime in the last 10 minutes, to almost nothing at all. We need to check for injured animals, she said. Not moving. Yeah. He didn't move either. Need to salvage what we can. Before dark. Need to figure out where we're sleeping tonight. His arm tightened, just slightly, around her waist. Delphine! A horse came tearing through the wreckage at a dead run, and both of them turned to find Obadiah Sloan, the young man who worked the Doyle spread 3 miles east. Bleeding from a dozen shallow cuts, his shirt torn to rags, eyes wild with a fear that had nothing to do with what had just happened to his own place. Mr. Thorne! His horse danced in place, sides heaving like a bellows. You've got to come. Tornado hit the Doyle place dead on. Mr. Doyle's trapped under the house. Mrs. Doyle sent me for help. Caleb's arm dropped from Delphine's waist. Already moving. How bad? Bad. His legs are pinned. She can hear him. Can't reach him. Caleb was already gathering what tools the wreckage had left him. A shovel, a pry bar, a length of rope wound somehow, impossibly, around the water pump handle, where the wind had flung it. I'm coming, Delphine said. Too dangerous. You'll need every hand you can get. She was already moving toward the 2 horses standing spooked, but unhurt at the far edge of what used to be the corral fence. And I know some doctoring. My mother taught me. Before. He looked at her a long moment. Something in his face settled, decided. Can you ride if you have to? Watch me. They caught the horses and rode hard, through a landscape none of them would have recognized an hour before. Trees stripped bare on one side of an invisible line, and left whole on the other, fence posts gone entirely, cattle scattered like something a careless child had knocked over and not bothered to set right again. The tornado's path cut through the prairie straight as a rail line, untouched on one side, erased on the other. Ahead of them, the Doyle place came into view, and Delphine's stomach dropped clean through her saddle at the sight of it. The house had been lifted, twisted, set back down wrong, walls leaning at angles that hurt to look at directly, the roof sitting in the yard like a hat some giant hand had knocked clean off. Constance Doyle stood at what had been the front door, hair torn loose from its careful pins, riding habit shredded at one sleeve, and when she saw them coming she made a sound Delphine had never once imagined, that particular woman capable of making. Thank God, Constance said. Thank God. He's under here. I can hear him, but I can't. From beneath the wreckage came a sound that stopped every thought in Delphine's head cold. Not quite a scream, not quite a moan. The particular sound pain makes when it's traveled past the reach of words entirely. Caleb was already moving through the debris, testing boards, calling orders. Obadiah, get every man you can find. We're going to need leverage. His eyes found Delphine. Check what medical supplies survived. Mrs. Doyle, talk to him. Let him hear you're close. Delphine dropped from her horse and went to work. She found the Doyle kitchen scattered but recognizable, and by some small mercy a bottle of carbolic acid sitting unbroken in the wreckage, clean cloth that used to be curtains, a sewing kit, with needles that might serve for worse than sewing, if it came to that. When she straightened up again, she found Caleb had stripped to the waist, muscle coiled tight, as he and Obadiah strained together against a beam that wasn't giving. Something was moving between the two of them. She felt it even, from a distance, felt the particular electricity of it. Something that had nothing left to do with arrangement or convenience, born instead in the dark of a storm cellar not 2 hours past. Caleb cursed. First time she'd ever heard the word out of him. She saw what he'd seen. The main support beam, the one holding what remained of the house's weight, was the same beam pinning Ambrose Doyle's legs. Move it wrong and the whole structure came down on top of him. Move it right and they might just pull him out alive. Caleb's eyes found hers across the wreckage, and in them she saw him understand, in the same instant she did, exactly what this moment would cost either way. "We need to shore the sides first," Delphine heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Build a tunnel. Pull him out without shifting the main weight." Caleb stared at her. "You've done this before. Saw it done once." She didn't add that 3 men had died anyway, that day back home, that the screams of it still visited her some nights even now. "Show me where the fence posts are. We'll use them for braces." "Show me," Caleb said, and just like that, she was in charge. 6 neighbors arrived within the hour, drawn to disaster the way storms themselves seem to draw rain, and Delphine directed them with a voice that carried the same flat certainty that had once, weeks ago, kept her standing straight on a train platform while an entire town laughed at the shape of her. "Sloan, those fence posts. We're building a tunnel, not a bridge." "Almost there," she called down, through a gap in the wreckage. "Mr. Doyle. 5 more minutes." Took 20. Every board placed careful. Every brace tested twice, before a single ounce of weight went onto it. When the tunnel was finally secure, Caleb went in headfirst, a length of rope tied at his waist, and Delphine held the other end along with 3 of the men, ready to haul him back the instant the wreckage so much as shifted. She could hear his voice, low, steady, talking Ambrose Doyle, through it while his hands worked to free the trapped legs. "Pull," Caleb called finally. "Pull steady." They pulled. Ambrose Doyle screamed once, sharp and terrible enough, that Constance's knees buckled beside Delphine, and then he went silent, and for one long, unbearable second Delphine thought they'd lost him after all. Then Caleb emerged backward out of the tunnel, dragging Ambrose by the shoulders, the man's legs twisted at angles that turned Delphine's stomach even, from 10 feet away. "He's alive," Caleb said. "But those legs." Delphine was already moving, checking for bleeding, feeling along both legs for the breaks, and there were plenty of them, both shattered below the knee, though by some mercy no major bleeding. "We need the doctor," Constance said, her face gone white as flour. "Doctor's 20 miles off," one of the men said. "If his own place even survived this." Delphine looked at the wreckage of Ambrose Doyle's legs. Thought of a mining accident back home, a lifetime ago it felt like now, and her mother's steady hands and the men who'd lived because somebody hadn't waited on a doctor who wasn't coming in time to matter. "I can set them," she said. Constance's hand shot out, gripped her arm. "You're not a..." "Your choice?" Delphine said, meeting the older woman's eyes dead on. The same way she'd once met Whitfield's on a dusty road, with a rifle propped against a wagon seat. "Let me try. Or wait and hope the doctor's road is clear." Constance looked at her husband. Unconscious now, face gray as ash. "Do it," she whispered. Delphine had Caleb cut splints from broken lumber, while she mixed carbolic acid into what water they had left. Obadiah held Ambrose's shoulders. For men held his hips down. "On 3, she said. Her hands found the break, through torn skin, steady despite everything. 1, 2. On 3, Caleb pulled hard, while she guided the bone back, where it belonged, and Ambrose Doyle woke screaming for one terrible instant, before the pain took him back under, which, she understood, working fast now, was its own kind of mercy. The second leg fought her harder, bone grinding under her palms until she had no choice but to break it clean, before it would set right at all. By the time both legs were splinted and wrapped, the sun had gone down behind clouds still bruised and heavy from the storm's passing, painting the whole ruined yard the same sick color the sky had worn just before it all began. Delphine sat back on her heels. Blood dried dark across her hands, her dress up past both elbows. "Will he live?" Constance asked, very quiet now. All her earlier sharpness burned clean away by the day. "If infection doesn't set in." Delphine stood, her legs shaking under her for the first time since the whole ordeal began. "If the bones knit straight." Constance caught her bloodied hands in both of her own before Delphine could pull away. "I was wrong," she said, "about you, what I thought, what I said that day I came to your kitchen." Tears cut clean tracks through the dirt on her face. "You're exactly what this county needed, what all of us needed, and none of us had the sense to see it." Delphine didn't know what to do with that, so she simply stood there, letting the woman hold her ruined hands, while behind her Caleb watched, with an expression she couldn't quite name yet. Not like arrangement anymore, not like convenience, like something else entirely. They rode home in the last gray light left in the sky, horses picking careful, through debris that hadn't existed that morning, and neither of them found much of anything to say. Too much had shifted in one single afternoon. The storm, the rescue, the particular way they'd moved together, through all of it like two hands belonging, finally, to the very same body. The ranch looked worse in the dying light than it had at midday. Shadows made the damage deeper, more final. The roofless kitchen gaped open at a sky gone the color of a fresh bruise. Delphine's lean-to showed its bare bones to the world, nothing left of it, that a wind wouldn't finish scattering by morning. But the chickens, still complaining loudly, from their overturned coop, were alive. The milk cow stood patient by what was left of the barn, needing milked regardless of what the world had done to the building meant to house her. Life, Delphine thought, demanding its due even now. Especially now. "We'll sleep in my room tonight," Caleb said finally. "Only space left with 4 walls standing." Delphine nodded. She had no energy left for anything resembling propriety, and some part of her understood, standing in the wreckage of everything either of them had built, that they were past the careful distances of their first weeks together anyway. Had been past them, if she was honest with herself, since the moment his lips had moved against her hair in the dark of that cellar, saying her name like an anchor thrown down into water too deep to find the bottom of. They picked through what remained by lantern light, salvaged what could be salvaged. The stove still worked, some stubborn miracle of cast iron that had survived what nothing else on the place had managed to survive. Delphine made coffee, fried eggs from nests scattered across half the yard, toasted bread over the open fire, since the stove's damper had finally, after weeks of sticking, simply given up and stopped closing at all. Simple food, the kind that tasted somehow exactly like survival. "You did good today," Caleb said over the meal. "With Doyle. With everything." "Learned it from my mother," Delphine said. "Before she decided I was better off dead to her, or she was better off dead to me. I've never been fully certain which way that particular arrangement was meant to run." He looked at her a long moment across the fire's uneven light, and didn't offer any easy comfort for that, and she found, strangely, that she was grateful for the restraint of it. They cleaned up what there was to clean, and faced, at last, the plain fact of the sleeping arrangement waiting for them. 1 room, 1 bed, 2 people who'd begun as strangers on a dusty platform, and had become, somewhere in the space of a single catastrophic afternoon, something neither of them had a tidy word for yet. "I'll take the floor," Caleb said. "No." The word came out firmer than Delphine had planned it. "We're both worn clean through. We're both grown. We can share a bed, without it needing to mean anything more than shelter." He studied her a long moment, nodded once. They readied for sleep, careful of each other, her behind the privacy screen someone. Rosalind, she understood now without needing to ask, had painted years ago with a careful hand and a brush loaded with flowers that had never once grown wild on this particular stretch of Texas scrub. Caleb turned his back to the wall on his side of the bed. The mattress dipped toward the middle regardless of either of their intentions, gravity pulling them closer together than propriety would have liked. Delphine lay rigid a long while, listening to every shift, every breath, every small sound the man beside her made in the dark. Delphine, his voice soft, into the quiet between them. Yeah, today, in the cellar, when I thought we might not make it out. A pause long enough that she could hear her own heart working through it. I understood something. What? There's a page, in Sarah's book, near the back. I wrote it myself before I ever went to that depot. His voice had gone rough. Wrote that I thought maybe stronger didn't mean stronger in body, meant stronger at choosing, not falling into something because it's convenient or expected or safe, choosing it, clear-eyed, knowing the whole cost of it going in. Delphine turned toward him in the dark, could just make out the shape of his face by what thin moonlight came through the shattered window. What are you choosing? She asked. You, he said, if you'll have me, not as arrangement anymore, not as convenience. His hand found hers in the space between them. As wife, he said. True this time. Outside, coyotes called somewhere out across the wrecked and silvered dark of the prairie, and somewhere further off still, past the edge of everything either of them could see, from this bed, in a locked strongbox in a locked office in a town that hadn't yet begun to understand what the storm had also uncovered, that day, sat papers with Elias Whitfield's careful handwriting all over them. Papers that would, before very much longer, tell a story neither Delphine nor Caleb Thorne had fully finished reading yet. But for tonight, in this bed, in this ruined and rebuilding house, there was only this. Two people who'd each expected nothing at all from the world, finding, against every reasonable odd, something that might actually be worth staying for. Morning came up gray and strange over a ranch that didn't look like itself anymore. Delphine woke first, lay still a moment, cataloging the wrongness of it. No roof creaking overhead the way it should, sky instead, pale and washed clean like the storm had scrubbed even the color out of it. Caleb's arm lay heavy across her waist. She didn't move to shift it, because some things, once found, a person doesn't rush to let go of again. They spent the next 3 days in the particular exhausted rhythm of people rebuilding what they could, and mourning quietly what they couldn't. The barn was gone entirely, nothing left to salvage but nails, which Caleb collected anyway, straightened one by one, over the fire in the evenings, because nails cost money, and money was a thing this ranch didn't currently have to spare. The lean-to stayed a bare floor and one standing wall. Delphine didn't grieve it much, told herself she didn't, anyway, some mornings believing it more than others. On the fourth morning, Obadiah Sloan rode up at a walk this time, which alone told Delphine the news he carried wasn't the kind that required a gallop. Found something, he said, swinging down. Out past the Doyle place. Storm carried debris a fair piece that direction. Found what's left of Whitfield's office. Delphine's hands went still over the wash bucket. His office, Caleb repeated. In town. Storm didn't stay in town. Obadiah shook his head, still half in wonder at it. Funnel walked clean, through the block behind the land office. Took the whole back wall off Whitfield's building. His strongbox got thrown near a quarter mile. Same one I told you about, Mr. Thorne. The one I'd seen him locking up nights. You found it. Found it busted open in a fence line. Obadiah reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, water-stained at the edges, but holding together. Didn't touch much of it. Didn't feel right to. But there's papers in there, Mr. Thorne. A lot of papers. Names I recognized. Caleb took the bundle slow, like it might bite. Untied the cloth right there in the yard, and Delphine came to stand beside him, and together they looked down at what 3 weeks of careful hoarding, and one indifferent storm had conspired to hand them. The ledger sat on top, leather-bound, water-swollen but legible, and Caleb's thumb moved down the first page slow, reading names Delphine half recognized, from 3 counties worth of gossip. Garrett, widow. Claim 40 acres, Missouri filing. Air clause C attached. Doyle A. Claim renewal pending. Terms offered. North 40 in exchange for expedited filing. Thorn C. Widower no living heir. Claim vulnerable spring review. Approach re. New wife's condition. Delphine's breath caught on her own family name written in another man's careful hand, filed away like livestock inventory. He's been doing this for years, Caleb said low. Not just us, not just Sarah before us. Underneath the ledger, letters. A dozen at least, some in Whitfield's hand, some in others, and one. Delphine's stomach turned cold reading it. Signed by a doctor's name she recognized, from a courtroom in another county, a year and a half gone now, thanking Mr. Whitfield for his generous consideration in a matter regarding a certain divorce proceeding, and confirming the report would read precisely as discussed. There it is, Delphine said quietly. In his own hand, not just Roland's word for it anymore. Caleb kept turning pages. Found a section near the back that made his jaw go tight and stay that way. Doyle's claim, he said. He's had his eye on the Doyle place for near 2 years. Been working Ambrose the same way he worked me. Same way he worked. He stopped himself, before the name came out, but Delphine heard it anyway, hanging there unspoken. Sarah. So it was never really about children at all. The thought settled into Delphine's chest, with a strange, cold clarity, the last piece of something sliding finally into place. It was never about heirs, or filings gone lapsed on some technicality. It was about land. It had always only ever been about land, and every rumor, every whispered shame, every woman made to feel broken on a train platform, all of it just tools. Tools he built and sharpened and used over and over on whoever stood closest to 160 acres he wanted for himself. We need to take this to town, Caleb said. Not to the sheriff. Delphine's mind was already working ahead. Fast. Whitfield's been paying off doctors and courting land offices for years. Who's to say the sheriff isn't another name in that ledger somewhere? Caleb flipped back through the pages. Found no sheriff listed, but the point held anyway. Sunday, Delphine said slowly. Whole county turns out for church. Every family he's touched, sitting in the same room at the same time. You want to do this in front of God and everybody. I want to do it, she said. In front of everybody, whoever laughed at me on that platform. Every one of them needs to hear this, from more than just my mouth alone. They need to see the proof. Word travels faster than a man can outrun it, and by Sunday morning half of Cedar Hollow already knew something was coming, even if none of them could, yet say quite what. The church sat full to its rafters. Delphine stood at the back beside Caleb, the oilcloth bundle held against her chest like something that might still, even now, be snatched away before she got the chance to open it in front of witnesses. Constance Doyle sat near the front, Ambrose beside her in a chair brought special for his splinted legs, and when Delphine's eyes found hers across the crowded room, Constance gave the smallest nod. Not friendship exactly. Something closer to an alliance forged in a wrecked yard 3 days past. Blood still drying on borrowed hands. Whitfield sat 3 rows back. Pressed suit. Careful smile already fixed in place for whatever social nicety he assumed the morning held. He hadn't seen the bundle yet. Pastor Whitcomb had barely finished the last hymn when Caleb stood. The congregation's murmur died fast, the particular hush that settles over a room when everyone senses all at once that the ordinary shape of a Sunday morning is about to bend into something else entirely. Got something needs saying, Caleb said. His voice carried, steady, to every corner of the room. Before we go on, with the day like nothing's changed. Whitfield's smile flickered. Held. Mr. Thorne. Pastor Whitcomb's eyebrows climbed. This isn't quite the... Won't take long, Pastor. Caleb's hand found Delphine's, drew her forward beside him at the front of the church. But it needs saying here, where everybody's sitting who's been touched by it. Delphine unwrapped the bundle, set the ledger down on the pulpit rail, where the morning light, through the tall windows, caught the water-stained leather full on. This belongs to Elias Whitfield, she said. Her voice didn't shake. She'd spent 3 nights making certain it wouldn't. Found in the wreckage of his office, after the storm. It's got names in it. A great many of yours. Whitfield was on his feet now, face gone the particular red she remembered, from a train platform weeks past, mopping at it already with a handkerchief that trembled visibly in his hand. This is a private matter, he said. Whatever's in that book. Your handwriting, Caleb said. Regarding my late wife. Regarding my current one. Regarding the Doyle claim. His eyes swept the room. Regarding a good many families sitting right here this morning. A murmur moved through the pews like wind through wheat. Garrett? Delphine read from the ledger and watched the widow near the middle rows go still as stone. Widow, 40 acres, Missouri filing. Airclaws noted. She looked up. Mrs. Garrett, did Mr. Whitfield ever come to you? About your claim. About what might happen to it should you remain unmarried past a certain term. The widow's face had drained of color entirely. He said the territory office was reviewing it. She said, slow, like the words cost her something to release. Said there was a way to secure it quiet. If I sold him the west section for less than it was worth. And did you? I told him I'd sooner lose the whole claim. A ripple of something moved through the congregation. Not quite anger yet. The kind of stunned, gathering quiet that comes just before anger finds its footing. Doyle. Delphine read next, and this time it was Ambrose, splinted legs and all, who went rigid in his borrowed chair. 2 years, Ambrose said, before she'd even finished the entry aloud. 2 years he's been at me. About the North 40. Said my filing wouldn't hold past the next review unless I. He stopped, looked at his wife. Something passed between them that Delphine understood without needing translation. An old argument, private, finally handed its proof in front of the whole county. He's been circling this whole county like a buzzard, Caleb said. Waiting on any claim he thought looked weak enough to pick clean. Widows, childless couples, grieving husbands. His jaw tightened. My first wife wrote about him in her own diary. The year before she died. Wrote he'd been coming around, talking debts, talking heirs, talking about the north section like it already half belonged to him. Whitfield's mouth opened, closed. And there's this, Delphine said, and pulled the last letter from the bundle, the one that had turned her stomach cold in the yard 3 days past. She read it aloud, every word, the doctor's name, the date, the plain confirmation that a certain report regarding a certain divorce would read precisely as discussed, meaning precisely as paid for. The church had gone dead silent by the time she finished. That report, Delphine said, turning finally to face Whitfield directly, was used to end my marriage, was used to send me east, alone, with nothing but a story about my own body that wasn't even true. And you paid a doctor good money to write it that way. Not because it was medicine. Because a woman shamed, and alone was easier to place somewhere useful than a woman, with the standing to ask questions about land filings. This is slander, Whitfield said, but his voice had lost its footing entirely, come out thin, and cracked as old paper. It's your own handwriting, Caleb said. It was Silas Reeves, of all people, the same man who'd stood ash-covered in Delphine's kitchen that first week and made a joke about mail-order goods, who stood up next slow from a back pew. He came to me too, Silas said, gruff, reluctant, like the admission cost him something. Year back, about my east grazing rights. I told him to go to hell. A pause. Didn't think much of it at the time. Figured he was just a man doing business rough. Didn't know it was the same business he'd done rough on half this room. More voices came after that. Slow at first, then faster, like a dam finally giving way, after years of quiet pressure building behind it. A farmer near the front. A widow 2 rows back. Names Delphine didn't recognize, each one adding another thread to a pattern that had clearly been weaving itself through this county for years unseen, because no single family had ever had cause to compare notes with any other. Until now, Whitfield stood in the middle of it all, mopping at a face gone past red, into something closer to gray, and Delphine watched the exact moment his careful smile finally, fully, abandoned him for good. Elias Whitfield. Pastor Whitcomb's voice, when it finally came, carried a weight Delphine hadn't heard, from the man in all her Sundays attending. You've traded on this county's grief and desperation for your own gain. In God's own house, with the evidence laid plain in front of every family you've wronged. I only ever offered. You offered ruin, Ambrose Doyle said from his chair, voice rough but carrying clear across the church. Dressed up as help. My wife near lost her husband under a collapsed house 3 days past, and you've been circling that same house for 2 years, waiting for it to fall into your hands. The silence that followed was complete. Whitfield looked around the church, at faces that had, until 10 minutes ago, greeted him politely on the street, tipped hats, invited him to Sunday dinners, and found not one of them willing to meet his eye with anything resembling sympathy. You'll leave this county, Caleb said, quiet, final, the same way he'd once told a red-bearded stranger to get off his land. By week's end, or every man in this room who's got a claim you've touched is going to want a word with you personal. Whitfield left Cedar Hollow on the Wednesday stage, alone, a single trunk loaded on behind him, and not a soul turned out to see him off. Delphine heard, weeks later, secondhand through the kind of gossip chain that never fully dies out no matter how a town tries to reform itself, that he tried the same tricks 2 counties, over and found the territory office there already waiting on him, word having traveled faster than he had. She didn't feel triumph exactly, hearing it. Something quieter. Something closer to a held breath finally, fully released. Roland Dunn she never saw again after that Sunday. He'd been sitting in the back that morning too, she learned later. Come uninvited, drawn by some rumor already circling ahead of the actual event, and had slipped out a side door somewhere in the middle of the widow Garrett's testimony, before his own name ever came up in the ledger's careful accounting. She thought, sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn while the coffee heated, about whether she ought to have said his name out loud, that morning too, whether justice demanded it. She decided, in the end, that she'd already given him more of her voice than he'd ever earned, that letting him vanish quiet into whatever life he'd built on a lie was its own kind of sentence. A man forever waiting on a knock at his door, that might, someday, still come. That was enough. She didn't need to be the one who delivered it. The rebuilding took the better part of 2 months. Neighbors came the way neighbors do once a debt's been properly named and properly paid. Silas Reeves himself, of all people, showing up one gray morning with a wagon full of salvaged lumber and an apology so awkward it nearly made Delphine laugh out loud in the middle of it. "Oh, you both better than what I said, that first week," he told her, not quite meeting her eyes, hat turning slow in his hands. "Man says fool things when he don't know a person yet. Man can build a barn instead of standing here saying sorry to my wife," Caleb said, and Silas laughed, relieved to have somewhere to put his hands besides his own hat, and got to work. My wife. Delphine still hadn't fully gotten used to the sound of it, kept catching herself listening for it, the way you listen for a favorite song on the wind, half certain you'd imagined hearing it the first time. The barn went up slower than the old one had come down. But it went up sturdier, Caleb said, testing each beam twice the way Delphine had taught him to during the Doyle rescue, and she found she didn't mind the extra weeks it cost them. Some things were worth building careful. The lean-to they didn't rebuild at all. Instead, Caleb tore out the last standing wall of it himself, one evening without asking, and Delphine came out to find him working by lantern light, sweat cutting through the dust on his face same as that very first day. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Building something else." He didn't look up from his work. This corner was going to be a nursery once. Her chest went tight. "You don't have to say that. Don't have to pretend it's not pretending anything." He set down the hammer, met her eyes across the wreckage of old lumber and older grief. "Building a proper parlor here instead. Room for a rocking chair. Room for reading come winter evenings. A pause, careful. Room for whatever this family turns out to be, however it turns out to look." Delphine didn't trust her voice just then. So she simply crossed the space between them and let him fold her in against his chest and stood there along, while listening to his heartbeat steady under her ear, saying nothing at all, because some things didn't need saying twice. They married proper on a Sunday in mid-December in the same church that had held Whitfield's reckoning 2 months before, and this time the whole of Cedar Hollow turned out not to gawk or whisper but to celebrate, and Delphine stood at the front of that church in a dress Constance Doyle had insisted on sewing herself. Penance, she'd called it, though Delphine suspected it had turned, somewhere along the way, into something closer to friendship. "You'll want to know," Constance said, fussing with the hem one last time before the ceremony, "that Rosalind would have liked you. I know I said different back when, but I was wrong about a great many things that week, and that's one of them." "Thank you," Delphine said, and found she meant it. "She'd have wanted him happy," Constance added, quieter now. "That's all any of us ever really want for the people we love, just to see them happy again, however that happens to come about." Pastor Whitcomb's voice carried clear through the packed church, and when he got to the part about whom God hath joined together, Delphine caught Caleb's eye across the small distance still separating them, and found him already looking at her, that same careful expression he'd worn on a train platform months back. Not pity, not calculation, just a man looking at something he'd decided, once and completely, was worth the whole of his attention. "This one," he'd said then, in front of a town that had laughed at her. "I do," she said now, in front of a town that had slowly, painfully learned better. Ambrose Doyle walked her partway down the aisle himself afterward, leaning heavy on a cane, legs healed crooked, but healed all the same, and told her, gruff, that he owed her a debt he didn't expect to ever finish paying. "Wasn't owed anything," Delphine told him. "Just did what needed doing. That's the whole of it, isn't it?" Ambrose's eyes crinkled, something almost fond in them now, where there'd only ever been polite distance before. Whole county needed somebody to just do what needed doing, instead of what was easy or what was expected or what kept the peace with a man like Whitfield. He shook his head slow, took a stranger stepping off a train to remind the rest of us what that looked like. That evening, with the wedding guests gone home, and the new barn standing solid against a sky gone violet at its edges, Delphine sat on the porch steps beside her husband. Her husband, the word still new enough to catch in her throat pleasant every single time, and watched the last light fail slow over land that had tried, more than once, to break both of them separately, before it ever thought to bring them together. "Whitfield's gone," she said. "Roland's gone. Land's ours, filing secure. No more circling vultures to worry after. Ranch is standing." Caleb's hand found hers on the step between them. "Barn's standing. Chickens are laying same as always, ungrateful as they've always been about it. Man could build a fine life out of that," Delphine said. "Standing barns. Ungrateful chickens. Man already is." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and out past the porch rail the first stars came up slow, over land that no longer felt borrowed, no longer felt like something she was only passing, through on her way to somewhere less shameful. It felt, for the first time in longer than she could rightly remember, like home. Years later, and there would be years, plenty of them, full of harvests good and bad, full of a marriage built slow, and careful the way Caleb had rebuilt that barn, beam by tested beam. Delphine would sometimes catch herself standing at the kitchen window in the particular gray light just before dawn, coffee heating on a stove whose damper no longer stuck, and think back on that train platform. On the sun that had held a grudge against every soul gathered there. On the laughter that had built and built until she'd thought it might swallow her whole. She never forgot it, didn't try to. Some scars, she'd come to believe, were worth keeping, not because the wound had been worth suffering, but because the healing over it had taught her something no unbroken skin ever could have. That the last one standing wasn't always the least wanted. Sometimes she was only the one nobody else had bothered yet to truly see. And sometimes, if a body was patient, if a body stood straight through the worst of it, if a body kept walking even when her legs shook with every step, the one who finally did see her turned out to be worth every single mile of the waiting.